Hello, and welcome back to another in-depth episode of Daily Dose of EOS. Now, I know there usually isn't two in-depth episodes in a row because that's a lot of information to be processed. However, there weren't too many stories today, so I thought I'll save them for an episode tomorrow. And two of the stories today actually does involve, in some way, the referendum system. One of them is Rex. Rex, if you don't know, is the next generation resource management system on EOS. The reason why Rex has to be put up for a referendum is because there's disputes about whether or not EOS Start Savings account funding should be used towards the rewards pools of Rex. The other thing is the ECAF complaint filed against Start EOS. Now, the block producers are unlikely to take action on it unless we put up a referendum and force them to act. This already gives you some idea of how important piece of the governance system the referendum contract is going to be. Again, the guest on this episode is Asphyxia. Asphyxia is a lead developer over at Novusphere, and they are building the UI for the referendum contract. There's a whole bunch of interesting things related to the referendum contract, but I'll let him take over for me. Enjoy the video. Very basically, what is the referendum and why is it important, and what can we as token holders do after that system is live?
Yeah, so the referendum is a missing piece in the EOS governance system. So as it is right now, you have the block producers, you have ECAF, and now you're going to have this referendum system. And the referendum system is probably the best way for token holders to represent themselves, aside from voting for block producers that they think are valuable to the system. So the way the referendum works is someone can put forward a proposal for some sort of change to happen in the system that breaks the status quo. So take, for example, the Rex. One of the reasons that have been discussed as to why the Rex might need a referendum is because the Rex, the proposal for the Rex talks about spending EOS from the savings account which EOS has flown to, that's been collected in fees. So from like RAM trading and from name auctions. And so at this point in time, status quo is nobody is allowed to spend from this account. And so because the Rex wants to start spending from this account, this is a breach to status quo. So that is one of the arguments as to why the Rex needs a referendum. So the way the referendum process works is after it's been proposed, everyone is then able to go to a referendum voting portal, and there will be several different voting interfaces that you can use, and you are then able to cast a vote of your opinion on the referendum. So in this case, maybe for the Rex, it might be, do you approve of this or do you disapprove of this, yes or no? And so your vote directly corresponds to how much you have staked. And similar to how it works for voting for block producers, you can elect a proxy to vote for you. But I believe one difference is that even if your proxy votes, you yourself can still vote differently than your proxy has voted, and it will discount your vote from the way your proxy voted. So you can
my vote.
Yeah, so for example, like let's say you have a total of 10 EOS staked and you have some proxies set, and so the proxy represents a total of 1,000 EOS, and the proxy chooses to vote yes. So at that point, there's 1,000 EOS being contributed towards yes by the proxy, and then let's say you choose to vote no. So now the proxy is only representing 990 EOS as towards yes, because your 10 EOS is being represented towards no. Right, so this is a little different than how it works with block producers, because if you set a proxy to vote for block producers, you
Mhm.
can't vote differently than how your proxy is voting without opting out of that proxy. You're
Right,
sort of
right, right.
along for the ride with however that proxy chooses to vote for BPs.
Okay. And is this the same proxy we're talking about, like, or do we delegate to a different proxy for voting on a referendum? This is the same proxy.
I believe it's the exact same proxy
Okay,
that you have
okay,
set for block producers.
okay. So you just have the additional option of voting on the referendums that your proxy might not agree with.
Yeah, so you're encouraged to still vote even if you have a proxy set because,
Mm-hmm.
like I said before, you might have a differing opinion than your
Mm-hmm.
proxy, and you actually have a chance to express yourself in this system
Okay.
differently than your proxy does.
Oh, very
And
interesting.
obviously, if you vote the same as your proxy, then
Mm-hmm.
your net outcome is the same, right? So
Mm-hmm.
again, like, you voted yes, your proxy only represents 990, but you voted yes, so you add the 10 in, you still have 1,000. So
Okay. And this is by stake, so by amount of token, EOS token staked.
yeah, so only the amount that you have staked is what matters. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have free floating EOS, it
Mm-hmm.
does not count as towards your voting weight in the referendum process.
And like, what is this? Is more of an opinion poll, like it is not how to say it, is not like a smart contract where if a threshold is reached, that change will push automatically. This is more like we're gonna have a vote and we're gonna see the result. Most likely, what block producers will is comply with that vote and upgrade the system, but this like is not hard coded to update automatically. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think this is the pragmatic way of handling this because
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of complications with if you wanted to handle this automatically. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, like let's say you propose, a a change to the status quo, like the
Mm-hmm.
Rex, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, what if the Rex was proposed before any of the code for it was written and the
Right,
community
right.
approved of it? So this raises an interesting question of, okay, now whose job is it to write the code for this? Who's going to do the testing for this? And all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, you might have a referendum, and this is a hypothetical case that passes. That's just
Mm-hmm.
completely infeasible to implement on a technical level. It just might not be
Mm-hmm.
possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so in scenarios like that, it makes sense that the BPs can sort of veto these type of proposals because, well, like I said, they're simply not technically plausible. But in the case that you have BPs that don't uphold um, referendums that should be possible and all the resources are there, then I believe the thought process here is that those BPs should be voted out. And
Mm-hmm.
my concern here is that while that sounds nice, in
Mm-hmm.
practice what we've seen is um, bad BPs or BPs not doing their job properly aren't actually being voted out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this raises, to question what will actually happen in this case scenario if we do run into it. So I do have some concerns in that regard.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. I actually did a video with JC from EOS Force showing that Start EOS and various Hubei, there was a document, I'm not sure if you remember, that came out that shows them like colluding with each other and vote buying. But look at it now, like they're still on top of the block producers list. So yeah, I don't know. Like I think that concern is very valid. Um,
I think what's interesting about it too is that even when there is so before there was plausible there's deniable plausibility to it.
mhm,
With the Huobi case, it was a leaked document that there
mhm,
was no actual confirmation of that this was
mhm,
going on, and it was purely speculative. And then while
mhm,
we can speculate that it's very likely, there wasn't conclusive evidence to show that this is the case.
mhm,
Now, since the Start EOS incident, there's very conclusive evidence to show that they're buying votes. I mean, they're the ones telling people themselves that they're paying votes to people. Now,
mhm,
whether you
mhm.
see that as a malicious intent or not is up for debate. But the point is that according to our current in-place constitution,
Right.
um, that is supposed to be a placeholder, but it's still supposed to be upheld, quote quote. They're clearly breaking this by offering this to the public, and I think what is most alarming to me is the passiveness that we're seeing from the existing BPs, because from my understanding of how the EOS system works is if two-thirds plus one of the BPs agree, they can actually forcibly remove someone from a BP spot.
Yeah.
And we are not seeing any of the Western BPs or any of the other Asian BPs, or any BP for that matter, really propose, that they removing Start EOS as a BP. We're seeing very passiveness from the BPs, and this gives me a big reminder of the sort of the chicken and egg problem that the Bitcoin community faced with doing a hard fork to increase the block size. We saw a lot of support from miners to increase the block size. I believe at one point Bitcoin Unlimited had over 50% of the hash rate. And even though they had more than 50% of the hash rate, right? So again, to compare this to EOS, even though we know that there's two-thirds plus one of BPs that have the ability to pull the trigger on this, they never pulled the trigger on forcibly trying to fork the network to a higher block size, right? Everyone was very passive about this. And even when they finally did fork the network, which was Bitcoin Cash, they did it with replay protection. And Bitcoin Cash obviously has a much lower hash rate than Bitcoin does now. So I think this passiveness that we're seeing from BPs is very similar to the passiveness we see from miners over in Bitcoin, and I don't think it's going to be good for the ecosystem in the long run. But I think the big part of the problem is nobody wants to be seen as like the bad guy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, like EOS New York. So just 2 points. One is that the intern constitution is not very effective, and it's largely been ignored. Like we enforce some parts of it some of the time. Like the example being ECAF, right?
Mhm.
So EOS New York did put out a new constitution, and one of the things I wonder is that when we have this referendum in place, is one of the things that we're gonna do is update the constitution, which again, like it would be pretty dramatic move to do
Yeah, so
that.
I believe it's always been a plan to put the Constitution to a vote to
Mhm,
get it ratified,
mhm,
and I believe the process for ratifying the Constitution will be through the referendum process. So whether that is the current version of the Constitution as we know it, somebody could propose that, or
mhm,
whether it's a newer version of the Constitution, such as some of the revised versions that we've seen come out.
mhm.
So I think we're gonna have to wait and see what the results on that are. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think the point here is if it's not enforceable by code and we're not socially enforcing it either, then what good is it?
Yeah, yeah, and I agree.
So this is one of the big concerns that I have.
Agree. And it's a very valid concern. I think that also goes to like the culture of the cryptocurrency space as a whole, where we are very against governance, even on EOS, right? EOS was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be unashamedly governed on chain, but we are seeing some of that. Like, oh, even Dan came out like saying that he kind of backtracked a little bit, which was kind of surprising for me. Like, oh, we should just have the Constitution and the recording contract to enforce parts of the agreement regarding to code. So like not even like what I mean by that is like if the software goes wrong and if you caught and it doesn't function according to the recording contract, then we step in. Versus something like the constitution we have, which is a very um, social document, a human document, where it's not related to software. Like things like vote buying, like that's not related to software. That could only be enforced by people. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know. Like there does seem to be a hesitation in trying to enforce some of these agreements we ourselves wanted to. include in the system. So.
Yeah, I think as well one of the interesting things about it is we talk about the Constitution not being upheld by the BPs, but also we have to also point out that Block 1 could be holding up the Constitution as well, right? I mean, we can't forget that Block 1 does have a bunch of EOS that they could be voting with, and they could be flexing their muscles in terms of their voting stake to vote out these bad BPs. But I think the risk that carries is if Block 1 starts voting with their entire 10%, that is enough for them to actually elect all 21 block producers, which I think a lot of the community would be okay with, because a lot of the community sees Dan sort of, as this benevolent person in this case. But I think from an outside perspective, it would be very negative, because a lot of people would just see it as EOS being centralized and Block 1 being, the dictators, whether they're benevolent or not.
No, I agree, and I think that's one of the reasons why they have abstained from voting, because like it is, I call it the nuclear option, right? Like if something dramatic has to happen, like block that one, it's the last resort. It's not something block that one wants to do. Like they want to kind of just let it play out, see how the system works without their involvement, because again, if they step in, they single-handedly vote in the top 21 block producer. They could pass any legislation or any referendum changes they want, like easily. So, yeah.
I think another problem that we have to consider, and this has actually been talked about in the referendum chat, is should exchanges be allowed to vote with their customers' funds? And I think we could see something trying to address that in the newer drafts of the Constitution that are eventually proposed via the referendum.
And how will you enforce that? Like, do you just blacklist the exchange accounts? Like,
Yeah, so it wouldn't be, again, this is not something that's automatically enforceable by code. It has to be socially enforced by the BPs. And yeah, I believe it would work something similar to that, which is you would essentially exclude the votes of certain accounts.
okay. I mean, yeah, I think that's pretty much the only way to do it, right? And it's not the best way to go about it, but it will be the only way to go about it. Unless like the exchanges themselves implement some kind of portal that could be verified by all the block producers that it works as intended, and they allow the users to vote through the exchange, which could, in theory, be something that could happen.
Yeah, I believe some exchanges do offer something like that, where their uh, their holders of EOS on the exchanges are allowed to vote. I'm not exactly sure how that works in practice, but it's clear that not every exchange offers that at this point, and we don't know if those exchanges that don't offer it, whether they are voting or not with their customers' funds.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, do you have anything else to add to the referendum system? Uh,
Um, I think it's a good system. There's a lot of use cases for it outside of just dealing with EOS governance. So, for example, how you do the tally of the votes is really up to the implementation of the clients using the referendum. So, obviously, in terms of EOS governance, all the clients are and all the voting portals are pretty much in agreement that they are basing it off of the amount of EOS that's staked in this proxy system that I talked about before. But other projects could use the referendum system for their internal governance, and they could, for example, do a tally instead of based on the amount of EOS that's staked, based on the amount of their own project token that's staked, or some other metric. So it's a very flexible system that can be used outside of EOS governance, and I think it'll be interesting to see what use cases outside of EOS governance the community finds for the referendum process.
what do you see it being used for?
I think projects, especially for example DAOs, can use the referendum to help govern their projects in terms of development and or decision making. And obviously, like I said, the tallying for how you count the votes would be maybe based off the a token that's associated with the DAO that's either staked or liquid, however they want to count that vote.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, you mean this is like a general purpose governance tool, right, on the EOS network, and like you say, it could be adapted by any project.
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly enough, it doesn't just need to be used for governance too. It could be used purely for survey purposes, right? So, for example, I could propose a referendum of, do you like pizza, yes or no?
True. I guess that's something Lumias would probably be interested in, since they're doing like a survey application.
I don't know anything about them, so yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting project. They essentially incentivize people to vote in the polls, and they exchange that information for like business partners. So like if you interested in knowing how many people prefer a blue UI versus a yellow UI, you could like conduct a poll. Voters would be incentivized, and then business would get the result. So it's pretty cool. So that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, this is only one part of a very long conversation. Link down below if you want to find the full version at Novusphere's channel. As always, if you liked the video and you found it informative, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and you're watching this and you haven't done already, hit the subscribe button. I've been your host, Jack, and I'll see you tomorrow.